The Railway Series number 5. Troublesome Engines. Dear friends, news from the line has not been good. The Fat Controller has been having trouble. A short while ago, he gave Henry a coat of green paint, but as soon as he got his old colour back again, Henry became conceited. Gordon and James, too, have been getting above themselves. I'm glad to say, however, that the Fat Controller has, quite kindly but very firmly, put them in their place, and the trains are running as usual. I hope you will like meeting Percy. We shall be hearing more of him later. The author. Henry and the Elephant. Henry and Gordon were lonely when Thomas left the yard to run his branch line. They missed him very much. They had more work to do. They couldn't wait in the shed till it was time and find their coaches at the platform. They had to fetch them. They didn't like that. Edward sometimes did odd jobs, and so did James, but James soon started grumbling too. The Fat Controller kindly gave Henry and Gordon new coats of paint. Henry chose green, but they still grumbled dreadfully. We get no rest, they complained as they clanked about the yard, but the coaches only laughed. You're lazy and slack, they answered in their quiet, rude way. But when a circus came to town, the engines forgot they were tired. They all wanted to shunt the special trucks and coaches. They were dreadfully jealous of James when the Fat Controller told him to pull the train when the circus went away. However, they soon forgot about the animals as they had plenty of work to do. One morning, Henry was told to take some workmen to a tunnel which was blocked. He grumbled away to find 2 trucks to carry the workmen and their tools. Pushing trucks, he muttered in a sulky sort of way. They stopped outside the tunnel and tried to look through it, but it was quite dark. No daylight shone from the other end. The workmen took their tools and went inside. Suddenly, with a shout, they all ran out looking frightened. We went to the block and started to dig, but it grunted and moved, they said. Rubbish, said the foreman. It's not rubbish, it's big and alive. We're not going in there again. Right, said the foreman. I'll ride in a truck and Henry shall push it out. Wheesh, said Henry unhappily. He hated tunnels. He had been shut up in one once. But this was worse. Something big and alive was inside. Peep, 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 he whistled. I don't want to go in. Neither do I, said his driver, but we must clear the line. Oh dear, puffed Henry as they slowly advanced into the darkness. Bump! Henry's driver shut off steam at once. Help, help, we're going back, wailed Henry, and slowly, moving out into the daylight, came first Henry, then the trucks, and last of all, pushing hard and rather cross, came a large elephant. Well, I never did, said the foreman. It's an elephant, from the circus. Henry's driver put on his brakes, and a man ran to telephone for the keeper. The elephant stopped pushing and came towards them. They gave him some sandwiches and cake, so he forgot he was cross and remembered he was hungry. He drank 3 buckets of water without stopping, and was just going to drink another when Henry let off steam. The elephant jumped, and whoosh, he squirted the water over Henry by mistake. Poor Henry. When the keeper came, the workmen rode home happily in the trucks, laughing at their adventure. But Henry was very cross. An elephant pushed me, an elephant whooshed me, he hissed. He was sulky all day, and his coaches had an uncomfortable time. In the shed, he told Gordon and James about the elephant, and I am sorry to say that instead of laughing and telling him not to be silly, they looked sad and said, You poor engine, you have been badly treated. Tenders and turntables. The big stations at both ends of the line each have a turntable. The Fat Controller had made them so that Edward, Henry, Gordon and James can be turned around. It is dangerous for tender engines to go fast backwards. Tank engines like Thomas don't need turntables. They can go just as well backwards as forwards. But if you had heard Gordon talking a short while ago, you would have thought that the Fat Controller had given him a tender just to show how important he was. You don't understand, little Thomas, said Gordon. We tender engines have a position to keep up. You haven't a tender, and that makes a difference. It doesn't matter where you go, but we are important, and for the Fat Controller to make us shunt trucks, fetch coaches, and go on some of those dirty sidings, it's not the proper thing. And Gordon puffed away in a dignified manner. Thomas chuckled and went off with Annie and Clarabelle. Arrived at the terminus, Gordon waited till all the passengers had got out. Then, groaning and grumbling, he shunted the coaches to another platform. Disgraceful, disgraceful, he hissed as he ran backwards to the turntable. The turntable was in a windy place, close to the sea. It was only just big enough for Gordon, and if he was not on it just right, he put it out of balance and made it difficult to turn. Today, Gordon was in a bad temper, and the wind was blowing fiercely. His driver tried to make him stop in the right place. Backwards and forwards they went, but Gordon wasn't trying. At last Gordon's driver gave it up. The fireman tried to turn the handle, but Gordon's weight and the strong wind prevented him. The driver, some plate layers, and the fireman all tried together. "It's no good," they said at last, mopping their faces. "Your tender upsets the balance. If you were a nice tank engine, you'd be all right. Now you'll have to pull the next train backwards." Gordon came to the platform. Some little boys shouted, "Come on, quick, here's a new tank engine." "What a squiz," they said when they came near. "It's only Gordon, back to front." Gordon hissed emotionally. He puffed to the junction. "Hello," called Thomas. "Playing tank engines? Sensible engine. Take my advice, scrap your tender, and have a nice bunker instead." Gordon snorted, but didn't answer. Even James laughed when he saw him. "Take care," hissed Gordon. "You might stick too." "No fear," chuckled James. "I'm not so fat as you." "I mustn't stick," thought James anxiously, as he ran to the turntable later. He stopped on just the right place to balance the table. It could now swing easily. His fireman turned the handle. James turned, much too easily. The wind puffed him round like a top. He couldn't stop. At last the wind died down, and James stopped turning, but not before Gordon, who had been turned on the loop line, had seen him. "Well, well," he said, "are you playing roundabouts?" Poor James, feeling quite giddy, rolled off to the shed without a word. That night, the three engines had an indignation meeting. "It's shameful to treat tender engines like this. Henry gets hooshed by elephants, Gordon has to go backwards, and people think he's a tank engine. James spins round like a top, and everyone laughs at us. And added to that, the fat controller makes us shunt in dirty sidings. Ugh," said all three engines together. "Listen," said Gordon. He whispered something to the others. "We'll do it tomorrow. The fat controller will look silly." Trouble in the shed. The fat controller sat in his office and listened. The fat controller frowned and said, "What a nuisance passengers are. How can I work with all this noise?" The station master knocked and came in, looking worried. "There's trouble in the shed, sir. Henry is sulking, there is no train, and the passengers are saying this is a bad railway." "Indeed," said the fat controller, "we cannot allow that. Will you quieten the passengers, please? I will go and speak to Henry." He found Henry, Gordon, and James looking sulky. "Come along, Henry," he said. "It is time your train was ready." "Henry's not going," said Gordon rudely. "We won't shunt like common tank engines. We are important tender engines. You fetch our coaches, and we will pull them. Tender engines don't shunt." And all three engines let off steam in a cheeky way. "Oh, indeed," said the fat controller severely. "We'll see about that. Engines on my railway do as they are told." He hurried away, climbed into his car, and drove to find Edward. The yard has never been the same since Thomas left, he thought sadly. Edward was shunting. "Leave those trucks, please, Edward. I want you to push coaches for me in the yard." "Thank you, sir. That will be a nice change." "That's a good engine," said the fat controller kindly. "Off you go, then." So Edward found coaches for the three engines, and that day the trains ran as usual. But when the fat controller came next morning, Edward looked unhappy. Gordon came clanking past, hissing rudely. "Bless me," said the fat controller. "What a noise!" "They all hiss me, sir," answered Edward sadly. "They say tender engines don't shunt, and last night they said I had black wheels. I haven't, have I, sir?" "No, Edward. You have nice blue ones, and I'm proud of you. Tender engines do shunt, but all the same you'd be happier in your own yard. We need a tank engine here." He went to an engine workshop, and they showed him all sorts of tank engines. There were big ones and little ones. Some looked happy and some sad, and some looked at him anxiously, hoping he would choose them. At last he saw a smart little green engine with 4 wheels. "That's the one," he thought. "If I choose you, will you work hard?" "Oh, sir, yes, sir." "That's a good engine. I'll call you Percy." "Yes, sir, thank you, sir," said Percy happily. So he bought Percy and drove him back to the yard. "Edward," he called, "here's Percy. Will you show him everything?" Percy soon learned what he had to do, and they had a very happy afternoon. Once Henry came hissing by as usual. "Wheesh!" said Percy suddenly. Henry jumped and ran back to the shed. How beautifully you wheeshed him," laughed Edward. "I can't wheesh like that." "Oh," said Percy modestly, "that's nothing. You should hear him in the workshop. You have to wheesh loudly to make yourself heard." Next morning Thomas arrived. "The fat controller sent for me. I expect he wants help. he said importantly to Edward. Shh, shh, here he comes. Well done, Thomas. You've been quick. Listen, Henry, Gordon and James are sulking. They say they won't shunt like common tank engines, so I have shut them up, and I want you both to run the line. Common tank engines indeed, snorted Thomas. We'll show them. And Percy here will help too, said the Fat Controller. Oh, sir, yes, sir, please, sir, answered Percy excitedly. Edward and Thomas worked the line. Starting at opposite ends, they pulled the trains, whistling cheerfully to each other as they passed. Percy sometimes puffed along the branch line. Thomas was anxious, but both driver and guard promised to take care of Annie and Clarabel. There were fewer trains, but the passengers didn't mind. They knew the 3 other engines were having a lesson. Henry, Gordon and James stayed shut in the shed, and they were cold, lonely and miserable. They wished now they hadn't been so silly. Percy runs away. Henry, Gordon and James were shut up for several days. At last the Fat Controller opened the shed. I hope you're sorry, he said sternly, and understand you are not so important after all. Thomas, Edward and Percy have worked the line very nicely. They need a change, and I will let you out if you promise to be good. Yes, sir, said the 3 engines. We will. That's right, but please remember that this no shunting nonsense must stop. He told Edward, Thomas and Percy that they could go and play on the branch line for a few days. They ran off happily and found Annie and Clarabel at the junction. The 2 coaches were so pleased to see Thomas again, and he took them for a run at once. Edward and Percy played with trucks. Stop, 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 screamed the trucks as they were pushed into their proper sidings. But the 2 engines laughed and went on shunting until the trucks were tidily arranged. Next, Edward took some empty trucks to the quarry, and Percy was left alone. Percy didn't mind that a bit. He liked watching trains and being cheeky to the engines. Hurry, 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 he would call to them. Gordon, Henry and James got very cross. After a while, he took some trucks over the main line to another siding. When they were tidy, he ran onto the main line again, and waited for the signalman to set the points so that he could cross back to the yard. Edward had warned Percy, be careful on the main line, whistle to tell the signalman you are there. But Percy didn't remember to whistle, and the signalman was so busy and forgot Percy. Bells rang in the signal box. The man answered, saying the line was clear, and set the signals for the next train. Percy waited and waited. The points were still against him. He looked along the main line. Peep, peep, he whistled in horror, for, rushing straight towards him, was Gordon with the express. Poo, 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 whistled Gordon. His driver shut off steam and applied the brakes. Percy's driver turned on full steam. Back, Percy, back, he urged. But Percy's wheels wouldn't turn quickly. Gordon was coming so fast that it seemed he couldn't stop. With shut eyes, Percy waited for the crash. His driver and fireman jumped out. Oh, groaned Gordon. Get out of my way! Percy opened his eyes. Gordon had stopped with Percy's buffers a few inches from his own. But Percy had begun to move. I won't stay here. I'll run away, he puffed. He was soon clear of the station and running as fast as he could. He went through Edward's station, whistling loudly, and was so frightened that he ran right up Gordon's hill without stopping. He was tired then and wanted to stop, but he couldn't. He had no driver to shut off steam and to apply the brakes. I shall have to run till my wheels wear out, he thought sadly. Oh dear, oh dear. I want to stop, he puffed in a tired sort of way. He passed another signal box. I know just what you want, little Percy, called the man kindly. He set the points, and Percy puffed wearily onto a nice empty siding, ending in a big bank of earth. Percy was too tired now to care where he went. I want to stop. I have stopped, he puffed thankfully, as his bunker buried itself in the bank. Never mind, Percy, said the workman as they dug him out. You shall have a drink and some coal, and then you'll feel better. Presently Gordon arrived. Well done, Percy. You started so quickly that you stopped a nasty accident. I'm sorry I was cheeky, said Percy. You were clever to stop. Percy now works in the yard, and finds coaches for the trains. He is still cheeky because he is that sort of engine, but he is always most careful when he goes onto the main line. The Railway Series number 6. Henry the Green Engine. Dear friends, here is more news from the region. All the engines now have numbers as well as names. You will see them in the pictures. They are as follows: Thomas 1, Edward 2, Henry 3, Gordon 4, James 5, Percy 6. Then I expect you are sorry for Henry, who was often ill and unable to work. He gave Sir Topham Hatt, who is, of course, our Fat Controller, a lot of worry. Now Henry has a new shape and is ready for anything. These stories tell you all about it. The author. Coal. I suffer dreadfully, and no one cares. Rubbish, Henry, snorted James. You don't work hard enough. Henry was bigger than James, but smaller than Gordon. Sometimes he could pull trains. Sometimes he had no strength at all. The Fat Controller spoke to him too. You are too expensive, Henry. You have had lots of new parts, and new paint too, but they've done you no good. If we can't make you better, we must get another engine instead of you. This made Henry, his driver, and his fireman very sad. The Fat Controller was waiting when Henry came to the platform. He had taken off his hat and coat and put on overalls. He climbed to the footplate, and Henry started. Henry is a bad steamer, said the fireman. I build up his fire, but it doesn't give enough heat. Henry tried very hard, but it was no good. He had not enough steam, and they stopped outside Edward Station. Oh dear, thought Henry sadly. I shall have to go away. Edward took charge of the train. Henry stopped behind. What do you think is wrong, fireman? Asked the Fat Controller. The fireman mopped his face. Excuse me, sir, he answered, but the coal is wrong. We've had a poor lot lately, and today it's worse. The other engines can manage, they have big fireboxes. Henry's is small and can't make the heat. With Welsh coal, he'd be a different engine. It's expensive, said the Fat Controller thoughtfully, but Henry must have a fair chance. James shall go, and fetch some. When the Welsh coal came, Henry's driver and fireman were excited. Now we'll show them, Henry, old fellow. They carefully oiled all his joints and polished his brass till it shone like gold. His fire had already been lit, so the fireman made it carefully. He put large lumps of coal like a wall round the outside. Then he covered the glowing middle part with smaller lumps. You're spoiling my fire, complained Henry. Wait and see, said the fireman. We'll have a roaring fire just when we want it. He was right. When Henry reached the platform, the water was boiling nicely, and he had to let off steam to show how happy he was. He made such a noise that the Fat Controller came out to see him. How are you, Henry? Pip, peep, peep, whistled Henry. I feel fine. Have you a good fire, driver? Never better, sir, and plenty of steam. No record breaking, warned the Fat Controller, smiling. Don't push him too hard. Henry won't need pushing, sir. I'll have to hold him back. Henry had a lovely day. He had never felt so well in his life. He wanted to go fast, but his driver wouldn't let him. Steady, old fellow, he would say. There's plenty of time. They arrived early at the junction. Where have you been, lazybones? Asked Henry when Thomas puffed in. I can't wait for dawdling tank engines like you. Goodbye. Whoosh, said Thomas to Annie and Clarabelle as Henry disappeared. Have you ever seen anything like it? Both Annie and Clarabelle agreed that they never had. The Flying Kipper. Lots of ships use the harbour at the big station by the sea. The passenger ships have spotless paint and shining brass. Other ships, though smaller and dirtier, are important too. They take coal, machinery, and other things abroad, and bring back meat, timber, and things we need. Fishing boats also come there. They unload their fish on the quay. Some of it is sent to shops in the town, and some goes in a special train to other places far away. The railwaymen call this train the Flying Kipper. One winter evening, Henry's driver said, We'll be out early tomorrow. We've got to take the Flying Kipper. Don't tell Gordon, he whispered, but I think if we pull the Kipper nicely, the Fat Controller will let us pull the Express. Hurrah! Cried Henry, excited. That will be lovely. He was ready at 5 o'clock. There was snow and frost. Men hustled and shouted, loading the vans with crates of fish. The last door banged, the guard showed his green lamp, and they were off. Come on, don't be silly, puffed Henry to the vans as his wheels slipped on icy rails. The vans shuddered and groaned. Trock, trick, all right, they answered grudgingly. That is better, puffed Henry more happily as the train began to gather speed. Thick clouds of smoke and steam poured from his funnel into the cold air, and when his fireman put on more coal, the fire's light shone brightly on the snow around. Hurry, panted Henry. They whooshed under bridges and clattered through stations, green signal lights showing as they passed. They were going well. The light grew better, and a yellow signal appeared ahead. Distant signal. Up, thought Henry. Caution. His driver, shutting off steam, prepared to stop, but the home signal was down. All right, Henry, away we go. They couldn't know the points from the main line to a siding were frozen, and that signal had been set at danger. A fall of snow had forced it down. A goods train waited in the siding to let the Flying Kipper pass. The driver and fireman were drinking cocoa in the brake van. The guard pulled out his watch. The Kipper is due, he said. Who cares, said the fireman. This is good cocoa. The driver got up. Come on, fireman, back to our engine. Hey, the fireman grumbled. I haven't finished my cocoa yet. A sudden crash, the brake van broke, the three men shot in the air like jacks in the box and landed in the snow outside. Henry's driver and fireman jumped clear before the crash. The fireman fell head first into a heap of snow. He kicked so hard that the driver couldn't pull him out. Henry sprawled on his side. He looked surprised. The goods train fireman waved his empty mug. "You clumsy great engine, the best cup of cocoa I've ever had, and you bump into me and spill it all." "Never mind your cocoa, fireman," laughed his driver. "Run and telephone the breakdown gang." The gang soon cleared the line, but they had hard work lifting Henry to the rails. The Fat Controller came to see him. "The signal was down, sir," said Henry nervously. "Cheer up, Henry. It wasn't your fault. Ice and snow caused the accident. I'm sending you to Crewe, a fine place for sick engines. They'll give you a new shape and a larger firebox. Then you'll feel a different engine, and you won't need special coal anymore. Won't that be nice?" "Yes, sir," said Henry doubtfully. Henry liked being at Crewe, but was glad to come home. A crowd of people waited to see him arrive in his new shape. He looked so splendid and strong that they gave him 3 cheers. "Peep, beep, pip, beep, beep. Thank you very much," he whistled happily. "I'm sorry to say that a lot of little boys are often late for school because they wait to see Henry go by. They often see him pulling the express, and he does it so well that Gordon is jealous. But that is another story." Gordon's whistle. Gordon was cross. "Why should Henry have a new shape?" he grumbled. "A shape good enough for me is good enough for him. He goes gallivanting off to Crewe, leaving us to do his work. It's disgraceful. And there's another thing. Henry whistles too much. No respectable engine ever whistles loudly at stations." "It isn't wrong," said Gordon, "but we just don't do it." Poor Henry didn't feel happy anymore. "Never mind," whispered Percy. "I'm glad you're home again. I like your whistling." "Goodbye, Henry," called Gordon next morning as he left the shed. "We are glad to have you with us again, but be sure to remember what I said about whistling." Later on, Henry took a slow train, and presently stopped at Edward's station. "Hello, Henry," said Edward. "You look splendid. I was pleased to hear your happy whistle yesterday." "Thank you, Edward," smiled Henry. "Shh! Can you hear something?" Edward listened. Far away, but getting louder and louder, was the sound of an engine's whistle. "It sounds like Gordon," said Edward, "and it ought to be Gordon, but Gordon never whistles like that." It was Gordon. He came rushing down the hill at a tremendous rate. He didn't look at Henry, and he didn't look at Edward. He was purple in the boiler and whistling fit to burst. He screamed through the station and disappeared. "Well," said Edward, looking at Henry. "It isn't wrong," joked Henry, "but we just don't do it." And he told Edward what Gordon had said. Meanwhile, Gordon screeched along the line. People came out of their houses, air raid sirens started, 5 fire brigades got ready to go out, horses upset their carts, and old ladies dropped their parcels. At a big station, the noise was awful. Porters and passengers held their ears. The Fat Controller held his ears too. He gave a lot of orders, but no one could hear them, and Gordon went on whistling. At last, he clambered into Gordon's cab. "Take him away," he bellowed, "and stop that noise!" Still whistling, Gordon puffed sadly away. He whistled as he crossed the points. He whistled on the siding. He was still whistling as the last deafened passenger left the station. Then 2 fitters climbed up and knocked his whistle valve into place. And there was silence. Gordon slunk into the shed. He was glad it was empty. The others came in later. "It isn't wrong," murmured Henry to no one in particular, "but we just don't do it." No one mentioned whistles. Percy and the trousers. On cold mornings, Percy often saw workmen wearing scarves. My funnel's cold," he would puff. "I want a scarf, I want a scarf." "Rubbish, Percy," said Henry one day. "Engines don't wear scarves." "Engines with proper funnels do," said Percy in his cheeky way. "You've only got a small one." Henry snorted. He was proud of his short, neat funnel. Just then, a train came in, and Percy, still puffing, I want a scarf, went to take the coaches to their siding. His driver always shut off steam just outside the station, and Percy would try and surprise the coaches by coming in as quietly as he could. 2 porters were taking some luggage across the line. They had a big load and were walking backwards to see that none fell off the trolley. Percy arrived so quietly that the porters didn't hear him till the trolley was on the line. The porters jumped clear. The trolley disappeared with a crunch. Boxes and bags burst in all directions. "Ugh," groaned Percy, and stopped. Sticky streams of red and yellow jam trickled down his face. A top hat hung on his lamp iron. Clothes, hats, boots, shoes, skirts and blouses stuck to his front. A pair of striped trousers coiled lovingly round his funnel. They were grey no longer. Angry passengers looked at their broken trunks. The fat controller seized the top hat. "Mine," he said crossly. "Percy," he shouted, "look at this." "Yes, sir. I am, sir," a muffled voice replied. "My best trousers, too." "Yes, sir. Please, sir," said Percy nervously. "I am very cross," said the fat controller. "We must pay the passengers for their spoilt clothes. My hat is dented, my trousers are ruined, all because you will come into the station as if you were playing grandmother's steps with the coaches." The driver unwound the trousers. The fat controller waved them away. "Percy wanted a scarf. He shall have my trousers for a scarf. They will keep him warm." Percy wore them back to the yard. He doesn't like scarves now. Henry's sneeze. One lovely Saturday morning, Henry was puffing along. The sun shone, the fields were green, the birds sang. Henry had plenty of steam in his boiler, and he was feeling happy. "I feel so well, I feel so well," he sang. Trickety trock, hummed the coaches. Henry saw some boys on a bridge. "Beep beep, hello," he whistled cheerfully. "Beep beep beep," he called the next moment. "Oh, oh, oh!" For the boys didn't wave and take his number. They dropped stones on him instead. They were silly, stupid boys who thought it would be fun to drop stones down his funnel. Some of the stones hit Henry's boiler and spoilt his paint. One hit the fireman on the head as he was shoveling coal, and others broke the carriage windows. It's a shame," hissed Henry. They've broken our glass, sobbed the coaches. The driver opened the first aid box, bandaged the fireman's head, and planned what he was going to do. They stopped the train, and the guard asked if any passengers were hurt. No one was hurt, but everyone was cross. They saw the fireman's bumped head and told him what to do for it. They looked at Henry's paint. "Call the police," they shouted angrily. "No," said the driver. "Leave it to Henry and me. We'll teach those lads a lesson." "What will you do?" they asked. "Can you keep a secret?" Yes, they all said. "Well then," said the driver, "Henry is going to sneeze at them." "What?" cried all the passengers. The driver laughed. "Henry draws air in through his fire and puffs it out with smoke and steam. When he puffs hard, the air blows ashes from his fire into his smoke box, and these ashes sometimes prevent him from puffing properly. When your nose is blocked, you sometimes sneeze. If Henry's smoke box is blocked, I can make air and steam blow the ashes out through his funnel. We'll do it at the bridge and startle those boys." Henry puffed on to the terminus, where he had a rest. Then he took the train back. Lots of people were waiting at the station just before the bridge. They wanted to see what would happen. "Henry has plenty of ashes," said the driver. "Please keep all the windows shut till we have passed the bridge. Henry is as excited as we are, aren't you, old fellow?" And he patted Henry's boiler. Henry didn't answer. He was feeling stuffed up, but he winked at his driver, like this. The guard's flag waved, his whistle blew, and they were off. Soon in the distance they saw the bridge. There were the boys, and they all had stones. "Are you ready, Henry?" said his driver. "Sneeze hard when I tell you." "Now!" he said, and turned the handle. Insert sneeze sound there. Smoke and steam and ashes spouted from his funnel. They went all over the bridge, and all over the boys, who ran away as black as soot. "Well done, Henry," laughed his driver. "They won't drop stones on engines again. Your coat is all black, but we'll rub you down and paint your scratches, and you'll be as good as new tomorrow." Henry has never again sneezed under a bridge. The fat controller doesn't like it. His smoke box is always cleaned in the yard while he is resting. He has now gone under more bridges than he can count, but from that day to this, there have been no more boys with stones. The Railway Series number 7. Toby the Tram Engine. Dear friends, poor Thomas has been in trouble, so the fat controller asked Toby to come and help run the branch line. Thomas and Toby are very good friends. Toby is a funny little engine with a queer shape. He works very hard, and we are fond of him. We hope you will like him too. The author. Toby and the Stout Gentleman. Toby is a tram engine. He is short and sturdy. He has cowcatchers and side plates, and doesn't look like a steam engine at all. He takes trucks from farms and factories to the main line, and the big engines take them to London and elsewhere. His tram line runs along roads and through fields and villages. Toby rings his bell cheerfully to everyone he meets. He has a coach called Henrietta, who has seen better days. She complains because she has few passengers. Toby's attached to Henrietta, and always takes her with him. She might be useful one day, he says. It's not fair at all, grumbles Henrietta, as the buses roar past full of passengers. She remembers that she used to be full, and 9 trucks would rattle behind her. Now there are only 3 or 4. The farms and factories send their goods mostly by lorry. Toby is always careful on the roads. The cars, buses and lorries often have accidents. Toby hasn't had an accident for years, but the buses are crowded and Henrietta is empty. I can't understand it, says Toby the tram engine. People come to see Toby, but they come by bus. They stare at him. Isn't he quaint, they say, and laugh. They make him so cross. One day, a car stopped close by, and a little boy jumped out. Come on, Bridget, he called to his sister, and together they ran across to Toby. 2 ladies and a stout gentleman followed. The gentleman looked important, but nice. The children ran back. Come on, grandfather, do look at this engine, and seizing his hands, they almost dragged him along. That's a tram engine, Stephen, said the stout gentleman. Is it electric? Asked Bridget. Whoosh, hissed Toby crossly. Shh, shh, said her brother, you offended him. But trams are electric, aren't they? They are mostly, the stout gentleman answered, but this is a steam tram. May we go in it, grandfather, please? The guard had begun to blow his whistle. Stop, said the stout gentleman, and raised his hand. The guard, surprised, opened his mouth, and the whistle fell out. While he was picking it up, they all scrambled into Henrietta. Hip hip hooray, chanted Henrietta, and she rattled happily behind. Toby did not sing. Electric indeed, he snorted. He was very hurt. The stout gentleman and his family got out at the junction, but waited for Toby to take them back to their car. What's your name? Asked the stout gentleman. Toby, sir. Thank you, Toby, for a very nice ride. Thank you, sir, said Toby politely. He felt better now. This gentleman, he thought, is a gentleman who knows how to speak to engines. The children came every day for a fortnight. Sometimes they rode with a guard, sometimes in empty trucks, and on the last day of all, the driver invited them into his cab. All were sorry when they had to go away. Stephen and Bridget said thank you to Toby, his driver, his fireman, and the guard. The stout gentleman gave them all a present. Peep, pip, peep, whistled Toby. Come again soon. We will, called the children, and they waved till Toby was out of sight. The months passed. Toby had few trucks, and fewer passengers. Our last day, Toby, said his driver sadly one morning. The manager says we must close tomorrow. That day, Henrietta had more passengers than she could manage. They rode in the trucks and crowded in the brake van, and the guard hadn't enough tickets to go round. The passengers joked and sang, but Toby and his driver wished they wouldn't. Goodbye, Toby, said the passengers afterwards. We are sorry your line is closing down. So am I, said Toby sadly. The last passenger left the station, and Toby puffed slowly to his shed. Nobody wants me, he thought, and went unhappily to sleep. Next morning, the shed was flung open, and he woke with a start to see his fireman dancing a jig outside. His driver, excited, waved a piece of paper. Wake up, Toby, they shouted, and listen to this. It's a letter from the stout gentleman. Toby listened, but I mustn't tell you any more, or I should spoil the next story. Thomas in trouble. There is a line to a quarry at the end of Thomas's branch. It goes for some distance along the road. Thomas was always very careful here, in case anyone was coming. Pip, peep, he whistled. Then the people got out of the way, and he puffed slowly along, with his trucks rumbling behind him. Early one morning, there was no one on the road, but a large policeman was sitting on the grass close to the line. He was shaking a stone from his boot. Thomas liked policemen. He had been a great friend of the constable who used to live in the village, but he had just retired. Thomas expected that the new constable would be friendly too. Peep, peep, he whistled. Good morning. The policeman jumped and dropped his boot. He scrambled up and hopped round on one leg till he was facing Thomas. Thomas was sorry to see they didn't look very friendly at all. He was red in the face and very cross. The policeman wobbled about, trying to keep his balance. Disgraceful, he spluttered. I didn't sleep a wink last night, it was so quiet, and now engines come whistling suddenly behind me. My first day in the country too. He picked up his boot and hopped over to Thomas. I'm sorry, sir, said Thomas. I only said good morning. The policeman grunted, and, leaning against Thomas's buffer, he put his boot on. He drew himself up and pointed to Thomas. Where's your cow-catcher? He said accusingly. But I don't catch cows, sir. Don't be funny, snapped the policeman. He looked at Thomas's wheels. No side plates either. And he wrote in his notebook. Engines going on public roads must have their wheels covered and a cow-catcher in front. You haven't, so you are dangerous to the public. Rubbish, said his driver. We've been along here hundreds of times and never had an accident. That makes it worse, the policeman answered. He wrote regular lawbreaker in his book. Thomas puffed sadly away. The Fat Controller was having breakfast. He was eating toast and marmalade. He had the newspaper open in front of him, and his wife had just given him some more coffee. The butler knocked and came in. "Excuse me, sir, you're wanted on the telephone." "Bother that telephone," said the Fat Controller. "I'm sorry, my dear," he said a few minutes later. "Thomas is in trouble with the police, and I must go at once." He gulped down his coffee and hurried from the room. At the junction, Thomas's driver told the Fat Controller what had happened. Dangerous to the public indeed, we'll see about that. And he climbed grimly into Annie the coach. The policeman was on the platform at the other end. The Fat Controller spoke to him at once, and a crowd collected to listen. Other policemen came to see what was happening, and the Fat Controller argued with them too. But it was no good. "The law is the law," they said, "and we can't change it." The Fat Controller felt exhausted. He mopped his face. "I'm sorry, driver," he said. "It's no use arguing with policemen. I'll have to make those cowcatcher things for Thomas, I suppose." "Everyone will laugh, sir," said Thomas sadly. "They'll say I look like a tram." The Fat Controller stared. Then he laughed. "Well done, Thomas. Why didn't I think of it before? We want a tram engine. When I was on my holiday, I met a nice little engine called Toby. He hasn't enough work to do, and needs a change. I'll write to his controller at once." A few days later, Toby arrived. "That's a good engine," said the Fat Controller. "I see you've brought Henrietta." "You don't mind, do you, sir?" asked Toby anxiously. "The station master wanted to use her as a henhouse, and that would never do." "No, indeed," said the Fat Controller gravely. "We couldn't allow that." Toby made the trucks behave even better than Thomas did. At first, Thomas was jealous, but he was so pleased when Toby rang his bell and made the policeman jump that they have been firm friends ever since. Dirty objects. Toby and Henrietta take the workmen to the quarry every morning. At the junction, they often meet James. Toby and Henrietta were shabby when they first came, and needed new paint. James was very rude. "Ugh, what dirty objects," he would say. At last, Toby lost patience. "James," he asked, "why are you red?" "I am a splendid engine," answered James loftily. "We're ready for anything. You never see my paint dirty." "Oh," said Toby innocently, "that's why you once needed bootlaces, to be ready, I suppose." James went redder than ever, and snorted off. At the end of the line, James left his coaches and got ready for his next train. It was a slow goods, stopping at every station to pick up and set down trucks. James hated slow goods trains. "Dirty trucks from dirty sidings. Ugh," he grumbled. Starting with only a few, he picked up more and more trucks at each station, till he had a long train. At first, the trucks behaved well, but James bumped them so crossly that they determined to pay him out. Presently, rumbling over the viaduct, they approached the top of Gordon's Hill. Heavy goods trains halt here to pin down their brakes. James had had an accident with trucks before, and should have remembered this. "Wait, James, wait," said his driver, but James wouldn't wait. He was too busy thinking what he would say to Toby when they next met. Too late, he saw where he was, and tried to stop. "Hurrah, hurrah!" laughed the trucks, and banging their buffers they pushed him down the hill. The guard tightened his brakes until they screamed. On, yelled the trucks. I've got to stop, groaned James, and setting his brakes he managed to check the truck's mad rush, but they were still going much too fast to stop in time. Through the station they thundered, and lurched into the yard. James shut his eyes. There was a bursting crash, and something sticky splashed all over him. He had run into 2 tar wagons, and was black from smokebox to cab. James was more dirty than hurt, but the tar wagons and some of the trucks were all to pieces. The breakdown train was in the yard, and they soon tidied up the mess. Toby and Percy were sent to help, and came as quickly as they could. "Look here, Percy," exclaimed Toby. "Whatever is that dirty object?" "That's James, didn't you know?" "It's James's shape," said Toby thoughtfully. "But James is a splendid red engine, and you never see his paint dirty." James shut his eyes, and pretended he hadn't heard. They cleared away the unhurt trucks, and helped James home. The Fat Controller met them. "Well done, Percy and Toby," he said. He turned to James. "Fancy letting your trucks run away. I am surprised. You're not fit to be seen. You must be cleaned at once." "Toby shall have a coat of paint. Chocolate and blue, I think." "Please, sir, can Henrietta have one too?" "Certainly, Toby," he smiled. "She shall have brown, like Annie and Clarabel." "Oh, thank you, sir. She will be pleased." Toby ran home happily to tell her the news. Mrs. Kindly's Christmas. It was nearly Christmas. Annie and Clarabel were packed full of people and parcels. Thomas was having very hard work. Come on, he puffed. We're feeling so full, grumbled the coaches. Thomas looked at the hill ahead. Can I do it? Can I do it? He puffed anxiously. Suddenly, he saw a handkerchief waving from a cottage window. He felt better at once. Yes, I can. Yes, I can, he puffed bravely. He pulled his hardest and was soon through the tunnel and resting in the station. That was Mrs. Kindly who waved to you, Thomas, his driver told him. She has to stay in bed all day. Poor lady, said Thomas. I am sorry for her. Engines have heavy loads at Christmas time, but Thomas and Toby didn't mind the hard work when they saw Mrs. Kindly waving. But then it began to rain. It rained for days and days. Thomas didn't like it, nor did his driver. Off we go, Thomas, he would say. Pull hard and get him quickly. Mrs. Kindly won't wave today. Whether she waved or not, they always whistled when they passed the little lonely cottage. Its white walls stood out against the dark background of the hills. Hello, exclaimed Thomas's fireman one day. Look at that! The driver came across the cab. Something's wrong there, he said. Hanging, flapping and bedraggled from a window of the cottage was something that looked like a large red flag. Mrs. Kindly needs help, I expect, said the driver, and put on the brakes. Thomas gently stopped. The guard came squelching through the rain, up to Thomas's cab, and the driver pointed to the flag. See if a doctor's on the train, and ask him to go to the cottage, then walk back to the station and tell them we've stopped. The fireman went to see if the line was clear in front. 2 passengers left the train and climbed to the cottage. Then the fireman returned. We'll back down to the station, said the driver, so that Thomas can get a good start. We shan't get up the hill, the fireman answered. Can't see what's happened. They walked along the line round the bend. Jiminy Christmas, exclaimed the driver. Go back to the train, I'm going to the cottage. He found the doctor with Mrs. Kindly. Silly of me to faint, she said. You saw the red dressing gown? You're all safe? Asked Mrs. Kindly. Yes, smiled the driver. I've come to thank you. There was a landslide in the cutting, Doctor, and Mrs. Kindly saw it from a window and stopped us. She saved our lives. God bless you, Mum, said the driver, and tiptoed from the room. They cleared the line by Christmas Day, and the sun shone as a special train puffed up from the junction. First came Toby, then Thomas with Annie and Clarabelle, and last of all, but very pleased at being allowed to come, was Henrietta. The Fat Controller was there, and lots of other people who wanted to say thank you to Mrs. Kindly. Beep beep, beep beep, Happy Christmas, whistled the engines as they reached the place. The people got out and climbed to the cottage. Thomas and Toby wished they could go too. Mrs. Kindly's husband met them at the door. The Fat Controller, Thomas's driver, fireman and guard went upstairs, while the others stood in the sunshine below the window. The driver gave her a new dressing gown to replace the one spoilt by the rain. The guard bought her some grapes, and the fireman gave her some woolly slippers, and promised to bring some coal as a present from Thomas next time they passed. Mrs. Kindly was very pleased with her presents. You are very good to me, she said. The passengers and I, said the Fat Controller, hope that you will accept these tickets for the South Coast, Mrs. Kindly, and get really well in the sunshine. We cannot thank you enough for preventing that accident. I hope we have not tired you. Goodbye, and a happy Christmas. Then, going quietly downstairs, they joined the group outside the window, and sang some carols before returning to the train. Mrs. Kindly is now at Bournemouth, getting better every day, and Thomas and Toby are looking forward to the time when they can welcome her home. The Railway Series Number 8. Gordon the Big Engine. Dear Ian, you asked for a book about Gordon. Here it is. Gordon has been naughty, and the Fat Controller was stern with him. Gordon has now learnt his lesson, and is a really useful engine again. The author. Off the rails. Gordon was resting in a siding. Peep, 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 peep. Hello, fat face, whistled Henry. What cheek, spluttered Gordon. That Henry is too big for his wheels. Fancy speaking to me like that. Me, he went on, letting off steam. Me, who has never had an accident. Aren't jammed whistles and burst safety valves accidents? Asked Percy innocently. No, indeed, said Gordon huffily. High spirits might happen to any engine. But to come off the rails, will I ask you? Is it right? Is it decent? A few days later, it was Henry's turn to take the express. Gordon watched him getting ready. Be careful, Henry, he said. You're not pulling the flying kipper now. Mind you keep on the rails today. Henry snorted away. Gordon yawned and went to sleep. But he didn't sleep long. Wake up, Gordon, said his driver. A special train's coming, and we're to pull it. Gordon opened his eyes. Is it coaches or trucks? Trucks, said his driver. Trucks, said Gordon crossly. Pah! They lit Gordon's fire and oiled him ready for the run. The fire was sulky and wouldn't burn, but they couldn't wait, so Edward pushed him to the turntable to get him facing the right way. I won't go, grumbled Gordon. Don't be silly, puffed Edward. Gordon tried hard, but he couldn't stop himself being moved. At last he was on the turntable. Edward was uncoupled and backed away, and Gordon's driver and fireman jumped down to turn him round. The movement had shaken Gordon's fire. It was now burning nicely and making steam. Gordon was cross and didn't care what he did. He waited till the table was halfway around. I'll show them, he hissed, and moved slowly forward. He only meant to go a little way, just far enough to jam the table and stop it turning, as he had done once before. But he couldn't stop himself, and, slithering down the embankment, he settled in a ditch. Oosh, he hissed, as his wheels churned the mud. Get me out! Get me out! Not a hope, said his driver and fireman. You're stuck, you silly great engine. Don't you understand that? They telephoned the Fat Controller. So Gordon didn't want to take the special and ran into a ditch. He answered from his office. What's that you say? The special's waiting. Oh, tell Edward to take it, please. And Gordon? Oh, leave him where he is. We haven't time to bother with him now. A family of toads croaked crossly at Gordon as he lay in the mud. On the other side of the ditch, some little boys were chattering. Coo, doesn't he look silly? They'll never get him out. They began to sing. Silly old Gordon fell in a ditch, fell in a ditch, fell in a ditch. Silly old Gordon fell in a ditch, all on a Monday morning. The school bell rang, and, still singing, they chased down the road. Pshaw, said Gordon, and blew away 3 tadpoles and an inquisitive newt. Gordon lay in the ditch all day. Oh dear, he thought, I shall never get out. But that evening they brought floodlights. Then, with powerful jacks, they lifted Gordon and made a road of sleepers under his wheels to keep him from the mud. Strong wire ropes were fastened to his back end, and James and Henry, pulling hard, at last managed to bring him to the rails. Late that night, Gordon crawled home a sadder and wiser engine. Leaves. 2 men were cleaning Gordon. Mind my eye, Gordon grumbled. Shut it, silly. Did you ever see such mud, Bert? No, I never have. You ought to be ashamed, Gordon, giving us extra work. The hosing and scrubbing stopped. Gordon opened one eye, but shut it quickly. Wake up, Gordon, said the Fat Controller sternly, and listen to me. You will pull no more coaches till you are a really useful engine. So Gordon had to spend his time pulling trucks. Goods trains, he muttered. He felt his position deeply. That's for you, and you, and you, Gordon said crossly. Oh, screamed the trucks, as he shunted them about the yard. Trucks will be trucks, said James, watching him. They won't with me, snorted Gordon. I'll teach them. Go on. And another truck scurried away. They tried to push me down the hill this morning, Gordon explained. It's slippery there. You'll probably need some help. I don't need help on hills, said James huffily. Gordon laughed and got ready for his next train. James went away to take the express. Slippery hills indeed, he snorted. I don't need help. Come on, he puffed. All in good time, grumbled the coaches. The train was soon running nicely, but a distant signal tracked them close to Gordon's Hill. Gordon's Hill used to be bleak and bare. Strong winds from the sea made it hard to climb. Trees were planted to give shelter, and in summer the trains run through a leafy avenue. Now autumn had come, and dead leaves fell. The wind usually puffed them away, but today rain made them heavy, and they did not move. The home signal showed clear, and James began to go faster. He started to climb the hill. I'll do it, he puffed confidently. Halfway up he was not so sure. I must do it, he panted desperately. But try as he would, his wheels slipped on the leaves, and he couldn't pull the train at all. What's the matter, he gasped. Steady, old boy, steady, soothed his driver. His fireman put sand on the rails to help him grip, but James's wheels spun so fast that they only ground the sand and leaves to slippery mud, making things worse than before. The train slowly stopped. Then, help, whistled James, for though his wheels were turning forwards, the heavy coaches pulled him backwards, and the whole train started slipping down the hill. His driver shut off steam, carefully put on the brakes, and skillfully stopped the train. Whew! He sat down and mopped his face. I've never known that happen before. I have, said the fireman, in the Bincombe Tunnel, southern region. The guard poked his head in the cab. Now what? He asked. Back to the station, said the fireman, taking charge, and send for a banker. So the guard warned the signalman, and they brought the train safely down. But Gordon, who had followed with the goods train, saw what had happened. Gordon left his trucks and crossed over to James. I thought you could climb hills, he chuckled. James didn't answer. He had no steam. Ah, well, we live and learn, said Gordon. We live and learn. Never mind, little James, he went on kindly. I'm going to push behind. Whistle when you're ready. James waited till he had plenty of steam, then peep peep, he called. Poop poop poop. Pull hard, puffed Gordon. We'll do it, puffed James. Pull hard, we'll do it. The engines puffed together. Clouds of smoke and steam towered from the snorting engines as they struggled up the hill. We can do it, puffed James. We will do it, puffed Gordon. The greasy rails sometimes made Gordon's wheels slip, but he never gave up, and presently they reached the top. We've done it, they puffed. Gordon stopped. Poop poop, he whistled. Goodbye. Beep beep, beep beep. Thank you, goodbye, answered James. Gordon watched the coaches wistfully till they were out of sight. Then slowly he trundled back to his waiting trucks. Down the mine. One day Thomas was at the junction, when Gordon shuffled in with some trucks. Phew, remarked Thomas. What a funny smell. Can you smell a smell? I can't smell a smell, said Annie and Clarabel. A funny, musty sort of smell, said Thomas. No one noticed it till you did, grunted Gordon. It must be yours. Annie, Clarabel, do you know what I think it is? Whispered Thomas loudly. It's ditch water. Gordon snorted, but before he could answer, Thomas puffed quickly away. Annie and Clarabel could hardly believe their ears. He's dreadfully rude. I feel quite ashamed. He's dreadfully rude, they twittered to each other. You mustn't be rude. You make us ashamed, they kept telling Thomas. But Thomas didn't care a bit. That was funny, he chuckled. He felt very pleased with himself. Annie and Clarabel were deeply shocked. They had a great respect for Gordon the big engine. Thomas left the coaches at a station and went to a mine for some trucks. Long ago, miners, digging for lead, had made tunnels under the ground. Though strong enough to hold up trucks, their roofs could not bear the weight of engines. A large notice said, Danger! Engines must not pass this board. Thomas had often been warned, but he didn't care. Silly old board, he thought. He had often tried to pass it, but had never succeeded. This morning he laughed as he puffed along. He had made a plan. He had to push empty trucks into one siding and pull out full ones from another. His driver stopped him, and the fireman went to turn the points. Come on, waved the fireman, and they started. The driver leaned out of the cab to see where they were going. Now, said Thomas to himself, and, bumping the trucks fiercely, he jerked his driver off the footplate. Hurrah! Laughed Thomas, and he followed the trucks into the siding. Stupid old board, said Thomas as he passed it. There's no danger. His driver, unhurt, jumped up. Look out! He shouted. The fireman clambered into the cab. Thomas squealed crossly as his brakes were applied. It's quite safe, he hissed. Come back, yelled the driver. But before they could move, there was a rumbling, and the rails quivered. The fireman jumped clear. As he did so, the ballast slipped away, and the rails sagged and broke. Fire and smoke, said Thomas. I'm sunk! And he was. Thomas could just see out of the hole, but he couldn't move. Oh dear, he said. I am a silly engine. And a very naughty one too, said a voice behind him. I saw you. Please get me out. I won't be naughty again. I'm not so sure, replied the Fat Controller. We can't lift you out with a crane. The ground's not firm enough. Let me see. I wonder if Gordon could pull you out. Yes, sir, said Thomas nervously. He didn't want to meet Gordon just yet. Down a mine, is he? Oh, laughed Gordon. What a joke, he chortled, puffing to the rescue. Boop boop, little Thomas, he whistled. We'll have you out in a couple of puffs. Strong cables were fastened between the two engines. Poop poop poop. Are you ready? Heave, called the Fat Controller. But they didn't pull Thomas out in 2 puffs. Gordon was panting hard and nearly purple before he had dragged Thomas out of the hole and safely past the board. I'm sorry I was cheeky, said Thomas. That's all right, little Thomas. You made me laugh. I like that. I'm in disgrace, Gordon went on pathetically. I feel very low. I'm in disgrace too, said Thomas. Why? So you are, Thomas. We're both in disgrace. Shall we form an alliance? What was it? An alliance, Thomas. United we stand, together we fall, said Gordon grandly. You help me, and I'll help you. How about it? Right you are, said Thomas. Good. That's settled, rumbled Gordon. And buffer to buffer, the Allies puffed home. Paint pots and queens. The stations on the line were being painted. The engines were surprised. The Queen is coming, said the painters. The engines in their shed were excited, and wondered who would pull the royal train. I'm too old to pull important trains, said Edward sadly. I'm in disgrace, Gordon said gloomily. The Fat Controller would never choose me. He'll choose me, of course, boasted James the Red Engine. You, Henry snorted, you can't climb hills. He will ask me to pull it, and I'll have a new coat of paint. You wait and see. The days passed. Henry puffed about proudly, quite sure that he would be the royal engine. One day when it rained, his driver and fireman stretched a tarpaulin from the cab to the tender to keep themselves dry. Henry puffed into the big station. A painter was climbing a ladder above the line. Henry's smoke puffed upwards. It was thick and black. The painter choked and couldn't see. He missed his footing on the ladder, dropped his paint pot, and fell plop onto Henry's tarpaulin. Paint poured over Henry's boiler and trickled down each side. The paint pot perched on his dome. The painter clambered down and shook his brush at Henry. "You spoiled my clean paint with your dirty smoke," he said. "And then you take the whole lot and make me go and fetch some more." He stomped crossly away. The Fat Controller pushed through the crowd. "You look like an iced cake, Henry," he said. "That won't do for the Royal Train. I must make other arrangements." He walked over to the yard. Gordon and Thomas saw him coming, and both began to speak. "Please, sir." "One at a time," smiled the Fat Controller. "Yes, Gordon?" "May Thomas have his branch line again?" Said the Fat Controller. "Well, Thomas?" "Please, sir, can Gordon pull coaches now?" The Fat Controller pondered. You've both been quite good lately, and you deserve a treat. When the Queen comes, Edward will go in front and clear the line. Thomas will look after the coaches, and Gordon will pull the train." "Oh, sir," said the engines happily. The great day came. Percy, Toby, Henry and James worked hard bringing people to the town. Thomas sorted all their coaches in the yard. "Peep, peep, peep, they're coming." Edward steamed in, looking smart with flags and bright paint. 2 minutes passed. 5, 7, 10. "Poop, poop." Everyone knew that whistle, and a mighty cheer went up as the Queen's train glided into the station. Gordon was spotless, and his brass shone. Like Edward, he was decorated with flags, but on his buffer beam he proudly carried the royal arms. The Queen was met by the Fat Controller, and before doing anything else, she thanked him for their splendid run. "Not at all, your Majesty," he said. "Thank you." "We have read," said the Queen to the Fat Controller, "a great deal about your engines. May we see them, please?" So he led the way to where all the engines were waiting. "Beep, beep," whistled Toby and Percy. "They're coming." "Shh, shh, shh," hissed Henry and James. But Toby and Percy were too excited to care. The Fat Controller told the Queen their names, and she talked to each engine. Then she turned to go. Percy bubbled over. "3 cheers for the Queen," he called. "Peep, peep, peep," whistled all the engines. The Fat Controller held his ears, but the Queen, smiling, waved to the engines till she passed the gate. Next day, the Queen spoke specially to Thomas, who fetched her coaches, and to Edward and Gordon, who took her away. And no engines ever felt prouder than Thomas and Edward and Gordon, the big engine.